Welcome to Montgomery, the capital city of Alabama and the location of some of the most important beginnings in our nation's history. Join us now as we hear the story of Montgomery's rich heritage through a walking tour with several local historians.
Montgomery, Alabama really is an amazing place. It was all involved in the activities during the Civil War.
And 100 years later, Montgomery becomes the birthplace of the modern civil rights movement.
We're beginning our walking tour at the riverfront today, but first I want to introduce you to Dr. Richard Bailey, who will tell you something about the building in which we now stand.
Thank you very much, Mary Ann. We are standing today in historic City Hall in downtown Montgomery. During the antebellum period here in Montgomery, and in fact leading up through and during the Civil War, this was a marketplace. But beginning in 1871, City Hall was constructed and downtown Montgomery would never be the same. This building burned in 1932 and the present City Hall was constructed in the late 1930s, but so many historic events occurred right here in City Hall. You have behind you, in that case, some of the relics from the Montgomery bus boycott, including a canceled check signed by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., the ledger of the Rosa Parks trial, and the memorabilia of the Montgomery bus boycott. But I'd just like to remind you that 100 yards from where we are standing here in City Hall is the courtroom where the trial for Miss Rosa Parks was held on the morning of 5 December 1955. Mary Ann, what are some of the other historic events that took place here in City Hall?
Well, the auditorium, in which we're standing right next to the auditorium today, was the scene of many happy and many sad events as well. And one of those latter events was the funeral of our wonderful Alabama folk singer, Hank Williams, who died, and the funeral was held here in City Hall, and he's buried here in Montgomery. Let's step outside and on to the first stop of our walking tour. Welcome to Montgomery's riverfront. It is here that much of our Alabama history began, and Dr. Craig Shelton is here with us today to begin our historic walking tour of this exciting and fascinating city.
Thank you, Mary. This region of Alabama has been occupied for about 14,000 years. There probably have been always Indian communities here. We just don't know the names. The first Europeans to come through here were members of the DeSoto expedition of 1540. Europeans did not come into the interior very much. So the Indians continued to occupy this place, and the last town that we know of was called Econchata. It was a community of Alabama speakers. The Alabama language is the one for which the state of Alabama is named. This community was burned in 1814 by troops under the command of General Andrew Jackson during the Creek War. And then, a short time later, 5 years, the town of Montgomery was established. The same reasons that made it a good location for an Indian community, access to the river, a rich river bottom lands, and so forth, are the same thing that made it an ideal location for an antebellum town.
And you know, often the goods that were brought from the river traveled through the tunnel up Commerce Street that led directly to Court Square. Mary Ann, tell us the exciting story of how Montgomery came to be.
I'm going to take us back to two villages, one which was located on what is now Commerce Street, and one which was located on what is now Dexter Avenue. Those two villages, East Alabama Town along Commerce Street, and New Philadelphia, the one that led up to Goat Hill, those two villages incorporated in December the 3rd, 1819, to form the city of Montgomery. Our towns were founded with the idea that we would provide the merchandise and the trading area for all of those cotton planters who were coming in. So Montgomery's role was as a trade and transportation center.
We're standing on the square and we are surrounded by history. We see the site of what was the city's first courthouse. If you wanted to marry, if you wanted to get a divorce, if you wanted to purchase livestock, but not only that, if you wanted to purchase slaves. The fountain that you see behind me was the place where you actually came and inspected the slave. You looked at the slave's teeth, you felt the male's muscles to see if he was actually as strong and well built as advertised. And then you went into the courthouse to consummate the deal. And as we move across the street directly behind me, you will notice the Winter Building. From that Winter Building, on 11 April 1861, Leroy Pope Walker, Secretary of War for the Confederacy, sent a telegram with orders that if Major Anderson did not evacuate Fort Sumter, the South had orders to fire on Fort Sumter. And when he did not evacuate, thus began the Civil War.
Richard, you know, many exciting things have taken place right here around the spot and up and down Dexter Avenue, the former Market Street, which led to Goat Hill and the Capitol itself. On the morning of April the 12th, 1865, Montgomery, in a state of shock and dismay and fear, was really scared out of their wits because the Yankees were coming. And to welcome the Yankees, we had set fire to all the cotton that was stored in the warehouses. So we had really created quite a bonfire for their welcome. We didn't want them to have it, and we knew we couldn't save it, so we just burned it up. They came, though, on the morning of April the 12th, which was exactly 4 years to the day that the war began. They came right up Dexter Avenue to the Capitol. It was frightening, but the war was over.
When General Wilson marched up to the state capitol here in Montgomery, that was the original, the first march from Selma to Montgomery. That was nearly 100 years before another march from Selma to Montgomery took place that many people are familiar with, that was led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That march took place March the 25th, 1965. Whereas Wilson March in 1865 ended slavery in the area, the march of Dr. King 100 years later, 1965, set into motion the end to disfranchisement of African Americans all across this nation.
Welcome to Goat Hill. And it really was a goat hill because Andrew Dexter, the founder of Montgomery, raised his goats up here. And so through history, since 1819, 1820, it has been known as Goat Hill. And the goats were removed in 1846 when Montgomery finally became the capital. Now the hill itself had been deeded by Andrew Dexter to the city of Montgomery because he knew, had vision, that Montgomery would be the capital. The first Capitol was a magnificent building, opened in 1847 and was quite the talk of the state until it burned down 2 years after that. So this Capitol that we're standing on the steps of now dates from 1851. The houses of the legislature in the Senate and the House of Representatives, both of those played a role in the Confederacy. The House of Representatives is where the Confederacy was organized. It was a little bigger, but the Senate certainly played its role. Richard, tell us what some of the other events that took place. So many things, particularly in the 1860s, took place right here in this Capitol building.
Directly behind me is where Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as the first and only president of the Confederacy, February 1861. And the crowd just was quite jubilant that day, knowing that the war would be short and the South would be victorious.
The building itself was a hotbed of Confederate sentiment, shall we say. And it played that role along with being the state of Alabama's capital as well. One of the paradoxes of history is right here, because the state capitol is within one block of the church that was the birthplace of civil rights, right here in Montgomery.
That's what makes Montgomery the fascinating city that it is. So many paradoxes here. The cradle of the Confederacy and the cradle of modern day civil rights.
When you think of all the extraordinary people who have spoken in this church, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who pastored here for 6 years, and then what happened in the basement of this church, which set so many things in motion.
That's right, Marianne. In this very room on 2 December 1955, E.D. Nixon and several Montgomery ministers met to respond to the arrest of Miss Rosa Parks the previous day. A few days later, the Montgomery Improvement Association was formed to coordinate a bus boycott that lasted for 381 days and helped to usher in the modern-day civil rights movement.
But it all started with one of the most important acts of civil disobedience in all of history.
On 1 December 1955, a Thursday, Rosa Parks had boarded the bus at the square. On that particular day, Rosa Parks was sitting at the frontmost section of the bus where black passengers could actually sit. But the city ordinance also said that the driver of the bus could ask a black passenger to give up his or her seat for a white passenger. On that particular day, Rosa Parks refused to relinquish her seat. James Fred Blake turned to her and said, "I need that seat. Are you going to get up?" And you can just imagine running through Rosa Parks' mind, no doubt, that day was the many times that black passengers were mistreated, talked to discourteously, and all of this boiled within her that afternoon. And when she refused, he said, "I will have you arrested." She said, "You may do so if you will." At that point, James Fred Blake left the bus, called the police department, and officers Mixon and Fletcher came, and they thought they were arresting Miss Parks. But what they really arrested that day was not Miss Parks, but segregation. They put an end to segregation by arresting Rosa Parks. And little did Miss Parks know, as she marched off of that bus that day, as she disembarked, she marched into the history books.
What happened in Montgomery had far-reaching ramifications around the world. Montgomery has been the birthplace of two important world events, one the Civil War and one civil rights. Montgomery has made progress far beyond where we stood in 1955. And the things that are taking place in Montgomery today indicate that we are conscious of our past, but we are most appreciative as well of what's taking place today.
In many ways, Montgomery, Alabama is a living symbol of beginnings. In addition to our rich Civil War and civil rights heritage, the nation's first electric streetcars were placed in service in 1886. And the Wright brothers established the nation's first civilian flight school at the site that is now Maxwell Air Force Base. Montgomery was also the birthplace and inspiration for Zelda Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Hank Williams, and many others. Today, Montgomery's downtown is vibrant. Our riverfront is a major attraction. There are 8 universities with over 20,000 students. We have over 15,000 military personnel, and Montgomery serves as a major information technology hub and is home to state-of-the-art automotive manufacturing. Thank you for taking the time to learn about Montgomery, Alabama's rich heritage. And march with us as we continue to make history.